am very happy to welcome Sara Eskreis-Winkler here today to give our lecture. I've known Sara for a long time. I think probably since you were in medical school. I think Dr. Gary Dorfman introduced the two of us at some point in time, and that was a while back. Um, but even though I have known her for so long, I wanted to do a good job today. So I asked her for her CV, and she sent me this enormous document that had lots and lots of stuff, as you might imagine, ranging from papers and talks and the usual thing. But apropos to a talk on AI today, Sara also did a really good job of summarizing her CV for me, and really brought out the high points and made it easy. So you are better than ChatGPT, for sure. So what she wrote is what it was summarized is she's an assistant attending radiologist at Memorial Sloan Kettering, a breast radiologist who's been focusing on and leading their department for artificial intelligence research in breast imaging. Sara was an MD PhD student here at Weill Cornell, and did her residency with us at Cornell. And I can tell you, um, not just based on the impressive CV that she's amassed since the time she's left here, but she really is the true definition of a physician scientist, someone who understands clinical medicine and really understands science and research and how you move the field of medicine forward. So I'm really looking forward to hearing you talk today, Sara. Thank you again, for doing this.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. Really appreciate it. Let me just pull up my slides here. Okay. Can everyone see before I get started? Yeah. Okay. So thank you so much for inviting me to speak here this evening on breast imaging and artificial intelligence, the current state of things, and also discussing future prospects. Here are my disclosures. Okay, so Lawrence Lessig, he's a law professor who wrote a book now more than 20 years ago at the dawn of the internet age. And in it, he discussed the idea that there's this East Coast code, which is made up of the laws and regulations from government officials in Washington, D.C. And then there's a West Coast code, which is the computer code coming out of Silicon Valley, which de facto creates a kind of law as well for how things in society will function. But due to the rapid pace of technological progress, it can be hard for the East Coast code to keep up with the West Coast code, hard to understand the latest developments, and hard to manage and regulate them. And so in this void, those that are the ones designing the code make all these kinds of decisions during the development of the tools that they're making, which have downstream effects on the impact that the tools have on the society around it. And so it's really important for us to make sure that the AI tools that we build have the values of our society baked in, so to speak, which is why in the realm of artificial intelligence for medical imaging, it's really so important for us radiologists to stay active, to stay involved, and to really help shape the future of medicine. And so in that vein, I'd like to take you first a little bit of background on AI to give you a bit of a deeper understanding, and then go through some of the examples of where things stand today and going towards the future. So when we talk about artificial intelligence, we're really talking about training a computer algorithm to do some sort of task for us in the realm of medical imaging, taking, let's say, calcifications on a mammogram and asking it to predict whether or not they're benign or malignant. So you can use this using traditional machine learning methods. And this was very popular in breast imaging now more than 20 years ago with CAD, computer-aided detection. And the way those kinds of systems worked is you got a radiologist and a computer programmer in the room together. And the radiologist would tell the programmer, these are the imaging features that I look at that are suspicious, these are not suspicious. And the programmer would kind of encode that into the computer program. That would be used to extract those suspicious or non-suspicious imaging features from the image. And then you could use some sort of machine learning classifier to use those features to decide whether or not the image was benign or malignant. But then now, about a decade ago, deep learning came on the scene. And what's so special about deep learning is that these models can do not just the image classification or the feature classification part, but the feature extraction as well. So now we don't need radiologists to point out specific things on the image that are important, but the model itself can be optimized to basically optimize which features are useful for a given task. This is, if you have enough data, much more powerful than these traditional machine learning methods. And when we think about image-based deep learning neural networks today, most of the tools that either we're using or that are in development or in papers are one of these two models. So either convolutional neural networks, or CNNs, or vision transformers, which are a little bit newer now. So I have a little table at the bottom to kind of compare and contrast. So when you're looking at convolutional neural networks, they're very efficient at local feature extraction. So I'm showing here this gray box is kind of like the receptive field for the neuron over here, meaning that's the input that the neuron sees to make a decision and output. And then there's multiple layers that do this. And each of these neurons are looking at a different subsection of the image. And so kind of modeled on how the human brain works, it's this hierarchical feature extraction that then the features get more and more complex, and there's some discrimination involved to do whatever downstream task you want. Whereas the vision transformers are better at global feature context. So here the image is broken into a bunch of different patches. They're encoded, or the position is embedded within the vectors that are created, and then you do these downstream multi-head self-attention and neural network processing as well. But the difference here is that this model architecture really allows the network to draw on connections not just within a local area, but more disparately within the image. It has the ability to have a more flexible architecture, which allows us to input multimodal data. So it's easier to combine, let's say, MRI and mammograms within the same network, or multiple prior mammograms. And we're starting to see the newer models on the market that are in the research lab or moving to the market using these transformer models. There's also better scaling with data. So if you have more and more data, the vision transformers do even better. But the CNNs have the advantage of having a lower computational cost and really higher clinical maturity. So more advanced models have been validated and have been around for longer. Can't stop without saying something about foundational models today. So I'd imagine this group is very familiar with the logos that I'm showing here. These large language models are pre-trained on massive diverse data sets. And so what I want to clarify here is these foundational models, what makes them foundational is not the architecture themselves, which is what I was explaining in those other slides, but it's the idea that there's this massive pre-training that's done, mostly with self-supervised learning, where the model learns some sort of generalizable features that can be then applied to more general purpose tasks as opposed to task-specific tools. So in the case of these large language models, they were trained to predict the next word in strings of sentences. And then when we think about image-based foundational models, which are also now up and coming, these are the newest and I think the least mature of the things that we're discussing. There have been several strategies to do this kind of massive pre-training. And here are two examples. So you can do masked image modeling, which is basically amassing. So the constraint to date with these medical image models is many of them are developed with supervised learning. You need curated, labeled data sets. Here you can just dump in a lot of images. And here's, for example, with the masked image modeling, you basically mask out or have a computer code randomly generate masked out portions of the image, and then it can be trained to recover those ground truth. Another type of pre-training that's done is more contrastive learning. So here's an example. There's two mammograms here. It's really the same mammogram, but it's a transformation of the image. So there's different ways to augment images or make changes in them, but they're really the same image. So this is just sort of a horizontal flip. And here you're trying to train an encoder to generate embeddings, which are really just more compact numerical representations of the image, but you want them to generate similar embeddings from these different transformations of the same image. And so you're trying to make images that are from the same source more similar, and images that are from different sources more different. And this allows these models as an initial pre-trained step to get some intuition as to what's in images. And now even more recent, you have models that are being trained with the radiology images and then the text themselves, also in this same type of contrastive learning way of trying to minimize or maximize the similarity between matches that should go together. Okay, so now let's bring us back to kind of the real world, or where things are in clinical implementation today. So if you go to the FDA website, it gives you a list of artificial intelligence medical devices that have been approved for use, and you see that radiology is just far and away leading the pack here in terms of FDA approved medical devices. And within the field of radiology, it's really breast imaging that is leading the way. And there are a few reasons for that, which I've outlined here. So one is just the availability of big data. We benefit from the fact that breast cancer screening is recommended on a population level, and especially in certain countries in Europe where you have nationalized health services, you really have data that's well curated at an enormous scale. And then also we benefit from standardized imaging acquisition. So mammograms are acquired in similar ways, with reporting done in similar ways, with the BI-RADS lexicon. Also, many of the images that we interpret have a binary outcome, so we're looking for benign or malignant. We're looking whether there was treatment response or not, and we have very good follow-up on our patients. Not just radiology follow-up, but pathology gold standard follow-up as well. And so for all these reasons, this is sort of ripe to, if you're going to develop a tool, all the ingredients are here to do it within the breast imaging arena. So when we think about where AI can be used in radiology today, it's really at every step along the way. So from deciding which patient should be triaged to which exam, doing risk assessments to see which tests are indicated, patient scheduling, figuring out which sequences to include during exam protocoling, image acquisition, image reconstruction. Deep learning can improve efficiency. Also things more on the radiology interpretation or interface side. So removing or sorting normal cases to towards the end of the day, or however you want to do it in a busy emergency room. And then kind of the bread and butter of what we're doing in breast imaging of cancer detection or lesion classification, report generation, patient referrer contact. Really, it runs the gamut. But today I want to focus on three categories. So when I think about breast imaging AI applications, really, they can fall in these three buckets. One is using AI for more improving the accuracy and precision of what we're doing. So trying to be better at breast cancer screening, for example. Discovery-driven AI, which really of the three is probably the most exciting. Here I'm referring to using AI tools to find hidden patterns in images that are not visible to the human eye, but are latent within the image. So for example, using it to predict, based on normal mammograms, who's going to get cancer in the future, based on images of patients who have cancer, who's going to respond to which treatment, and then more efficiency-driven AI, using it to improve workflow as well. Okay, so let's go through them one by one. So in terms of AI for accuracy and precision, I'm going to focus on AI for screening mammography. That's really the one that's made waves and has really transformed, even in clinical practice, how we're doing things at our center, and I imagine at some of your centers today as well. But let's go through some of the background first. So I don't think I have to explain to this group that there are some challenges associated with screening mammography. There is some variability in the diagnostic accuracy among radiologists, particularly those who are not fellowship trained in breast imaging, and there's a global shortage of patients with that kind of fellowship expertise. And so AI has the potential to improve the diagnostic performance of the radiologist interpreting these exams. Right now, for every 1,000 women who have a screening mammogram, we are diagnosing about 5 or 6 cancers. So you could imagine that using AI to better triage women of who needs what test when, instead of having sort of a one-size-fits-all, every woman starting at age 40 should get a mammogram every year, as well as using AI on the interpretation side, might be able to change this ratio to basically maximize the benefits of screening while minimizing the harms. So in terms of AI in breast screening, there have been several large retrospective studies, even showing standalone AI for screening mammography performs at or above the level of radiologists. For those who want to dig a little deeper, this is a nice systematic review and meta-analysis on this. And if I was giving this talk a year or two ago, this section would have kind of stopped here. But and we'd start to talk about, will this translate into real world performance? There's risks of study bias with these studies. We haven't really thought about how we're going to integrate AI into workflow. But now, really, there have been several prospective trials that are ongoing that have reported initial results to explain and evaluate AI performance in a more real world setting. And there are multiple FDA approved devices that have started to creep into the clinic as well. So I want to go through 3 papers, which are recent and prospective, to try and show you, give you a sense of the state of the art that you can expect of performance of these tools today. So the first is Masai. It's the only randomized controlled population-based trial to date. It comes out of Sweden. 80,000 participants. They were part of a national screening program. It was published in Lancet Oncology in 2023. As an aside, I should note that this study comes out of Europe, where the standard of care is to get a mammogram every 2 to 3 years, and each mammogram is interpreted by 2 radiologists together. That's in contrast in the United States, where we recommend starting at age 40, everyone should have a mammogram annually, and typically those mammograms are interpreted by a single radiologist. So in this study, they randomized patients who came to the control group, where 2 radiologists interpreted the study, versus the intervention group. In the intervention group, they had the AI model look at the mammogram, and if it was deemed high suspicion, then 2 radiologists and the AI interpreted the mammogram, whereas if it was low suspicion, then only 1 radiologist and AI interpreted the mammogram. And they found that compared to the control group, the intervention group actually had a higher cancer detection rate, 6.1 per thousand instead of 5.1. And it's always important, you always have to look not just at the cancer detection rate, but at the recall rate as well. But here the recall rate was pretty constant, so around 2%, not statistically significantly different. We're still awaiting results on the interval cancer rate, which was their primary outcome. That's still pending. It takes a little bit longer to get the follow-up needed on that. And so we'll stay tuned for those results. But a similar trial also out of Sweden was also published a year or 2 ago, the Screen Trust CAD trial, which is similar, also prospective trial, large patient population, 55,000 women, and they evaluated the effect of incorporating AI as an independent reader. They basically had, for each mammogram, they had 2 radiologists and a computer analyze and give a score on the mammogram, and that allowed them to compare 4 different strategies, using 2 radiologists, which again was their standard of care, swapping out 1 radiologist with a computer, having the computer alone, and then all 3 together. And what they did was, if any reader, either the computer or the radiologist, flagged it as abnormal, it would go to a consensus discussion where 2 radiologists would figure out what to do about it. So here are the results. So with the 2 radiologists, standard of care, the cancer detection rate was 4.5 per thousand. When you swapped out 1 radiologist with the computer, there was a statistically significant increase in the cancer detection rate to 4.7. If you used the computer alone, the cancer detection rate was the same, 4.4, non-inferior. And then if you used all 3, there was a higher cancer detection rate. It's interesting to look at this plot below, where the peach is the standard of care in terms of recalls. And you see the blue and the purple, which is when you include the computer in the analysis, not alone, but in combination with the human, the abnormal interpretations go up. But what's really interesting here is adding that consensus conference where you have the radiologist then decide what to do brings the recall rate down to what it was before, and the biopsies and cancer rates follow as well. And so this is also a nice paper just showing that really you can swap out the second reader with the radiologist, with the computer, and really across Europe that's what they're starting to do. The third and final paper I want to go through is important. It's out of South Korea, and there was a single reader study. So it has a little bit more applicability to our current reading environment, because we're also a single reader center, or we're all single reader centers mostly in the United States. Also a large study, 32,000 participants. The mammograms in the study were read without AI and then with AI. So I just want to take you through this table. So they interestingly analyzed the results for breast imagers and then for general radiologists. So for the breast imager, the baseline cancer detection rate without AI was 5.1 per thousand. Adding AI bumped it up to 5.7, and the standalone computer had a cancer detection rate of 5.2, so basically similar to the radiologist, but you always have to look at the flip side, the recall rate. So we're starting the radiologists themselves, 4.48. doesn't really bump up that much with the computer, 4.53, but then look at that, the standalone AI tool has a higher recall rate. So overall, the breast radiologist is outperforming the computer in this study. But things get interesting when you look at the general radiologist. So their baseline cancer detection rate is lower, 3.87. When they use AI, it improves to 4.89. But the kicker here is that when you use AI alone, it actually gets even better. So really, when the general radiologist is using AI as an aid, they really should listen to it more than whatever they were doing in this joint decision making in the center. Always important to look at the recall rate. So their baseline recall rate was 6.3. It bumped up when they used AI, so 6.89, and then came back down to where it was before with the standalone AI. I think one of the take homes here is that you always have to look at the AI tool not in a vacuum, but in the larger context of who's using it, how it's used, and the patient population as well. Okay, so now I want to go through a little bit the FDA approved systems for breast cancer detection today. There's several on the market. They were approved between 2018 and 2022, and so they're starting to filter their way into our practices. They're all pretty easy to use. The workstation integration is pretty seamless. You can toggle the AI markings on and off at the radiologist's discretion. But the bigger question here is really, what is it doing to our cancer detection rate? What is it doing to our recalls? And what is it doing to our clinical interpretation time? And those are the three real questions that we always have to keep in mind when we're using these tools. I want to give you a little bit of background about our AI deployment at Memorial Sloan Kettering. Basically, the beginning of this year, we started using one of these tools. I would say we're still in the piloting stage of this. We're running the AI tool on the screening mammograms in clinic, but we're still in the process of gathering and analyzing data on how AI is impacting these metrics of cancer detection, recall rate, and interpretation time. The thing I'd like to stress really is that every center is unique. You need to establish that these AI tools work at your center, on your imaging equipment, in your patient population. They're FDA approved, but that doesn't mean that it's going to work as expected out of the box at your place. You need internal validation prior to use. And the best way to do that is to evaluate the performance of these tools on exams where you have a known reference standard, and to show that it works well across the board, and also ensure high performance across groups. And that could be groups of different vendors that you're using for the imaging hardware, imaging software, but also patient demographic groups as well. And so that's what we've started doing here. I want to show you a little bit of the retrospective analysis that we did prior to starting to use the AI tool at our center. So we amassed 4 different cohorts of patients, and each cohort had 200 exams. So we had in cohort 1 screen detected cancer. So that's patients who are mammograms that were interpreted as positive or abnormal at our center, and then the patient developed breast cancer within a few months, or was diagnosed within a few months of cancer, with cancer after undergoing biopsy. Cohort 2 was false negatives or interval cancer. So those are patients who we gave a negative assessment to, and then they developed cancer. This is within 18 months, so it's a little bit longer than a true interval cancer, which is usually within 12 months. And then cohorts 3 and 4 are negative screens. So true negatives, they came in, we gave them a negative assessment, they didn't have cancer. So we looked to see how the AI tool in a standalone fashion did on these groups. So in cohort 1, 70% of those screen detected cancers were given an elevated risk score by our AI tool, and only 10% were given a low risk. And we're in the process of looking at this more granularly to look at those 10% to see what kinds of things were being missed. With cohort 2, the AI scores were a little bit all over the map. In cohort 3, it was reassuring and mostly as expected, in the sense that these are negative exams, and according to the vendor guidelines, we should expect that at least 60% of the negative exams are given a low risk designation. And here it's almost 60% in the blue. But cohort 4 is interesting because those are patients who have a history of breast cancer and presumably breast surgery, most of them. And there, the AI tool was not as good as identifying those low risk patients. And that's something that didn't dissuade us from starting to use this in clinic, but it's just an example that you have to know your population. You have to know in what situations this AI tool is going to work. And it's quite evident that in patients who have a history of breast surgery, that this tool is not as reliable. I would say that one of the biggest challenges of implementing this and rolling it out at our center is the monitoring of use and the monitoring of outcomes over time. So we know that these models are subject to performance drift. They require ongoing monitoring, QA, QC, and it's been a challenge to set up sort of the automated pipeline infrastructure to facilitate that. Just to give you a little bit of a larger view here. So in terms of when you're monitoring outcomes, it's important, and it really depends on the reference standard of the AI model. So if you have a model that's output is with the gold standard is within the radiology report, it's relatively easy to monitor. Let's say you have an AI tool that measures the volume of a tumor or measures the tumor in some way. Then within the radiology report, you have the gold standard and you can track things pretty straightforwardly. But in our case, for instance, the gold standard is really the pathology reference standard for cancer detection. It's beyond the radiology report, and it becomes a little bit harder to monitor. And it's even more difficult based on the mode of use. So in these AI tools that I'm showing you for screening mammography, they're not being used in a standalone fashion. The radiologist is still the ultimate arbiter of what the BI-RADS score is. They consult or can view the AI output and then engage in some sort of joint decision making. They're free to accept or reject the AI output. And then it becomes very hard to kind of tease out how is the AI tool doing, how is the human doing using the AI tool, and it's really a little bit more tangled and requires a little bit more thought in terms of evaluating performance over time. So that's something we're working on. Just take home points here. So I think that it's clear that across multiple studies, across multiple vendors, these AI tools for screening mammography are ready to replace a second independent reader at centers where there is double reading, and this is starting to happen. It can be especially helpful where fellowship trained radiologists are not available. But then just a word of caution, we need vigilance in terms of the performance drift. It requires active monitoring and just working with your regulatory and bureaucratic infrastructure at your hospital or center to make sure that those kind of monitoring activities are being done. And I think also we still need more real world evidence. We're working towards providing that, and I encourage your centers to as well as we gather more data from how things work in real life. Okay, so I guess we'll hold questions to the end, or I don't know how this works. I guess I'll keep going.
Yeah, we'll do questions at the end, I think.
Okay, all right, that's fine. Okay, so the next topic I want to talk about is discovery-driven AI. So AI for cancer risk prediction is the specific topic I'm going to talk about. So why do we need risk prediction? Determining eligibility for screening breast MRI, the need for chemo prevention in some cases, and then ultimately, if we were able to more accurately predict who was at risk for cancer over the next few years, we could create more personalized risk-adjusted screening paradigms to minimize harms of screening and do things more efficiently. So what are we doing today? So there are epidemiologically based statistical tools like the Tyrer-Cuzick model, the Gale model. That's what we're using in clinic here. And it's based on clinical risk factors. So reproductive factors, family history, history of breast biopsies, smoking, alcohol use, height, weight, and mammographic density in the newest versions. And the AUCs of these models are in the mid-50s to mid-60s, so not that great. The exciting news on this front is now 5, 6, 7 years ago, out of MIT, there was an AI-based model using mammography data coming out of Regina Barzolet's lab that basically, instead of using this Tyrer-Cuzick model, you could use the mammogram image itself to predict 5-year cancer risk. And basically, the model would take the 4 standard views of the mammogram, and the output would be cancer risk at years 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And they trained their model using data from MGH, 200,000 mammograms. They validated on 25,000 and tested on another 25,000. But what's unique about this group is they didn't stop there. They went around the world collecting mammography data with these future cancer incidence labels from other sites in the US, from Israel, from Sweden, from China, from South America, and thousands of cases, as you see here, from each place. And here's their big table at the end of the paper showing results. And as you see, the C indices, which are similar to AUCs, are ranging from 0.75 to 0.84 compared to the Tyrer-Cuzick model, which had a C index of 0.62. Really, there's a little nuance here because although the main table is table 2, they're really including patients who were some of whom had cancer diagnosed within the following 6 months. So it's unclear whether it's really a risk prediction tool there or a cancer detection. And so there could be artificially inflated positive cases in that setting. And so really you have to dig into Appendix A5, a table A5 of the paper, and here the C indices are a bit more modest from 0.69 up to 0.78, but still beating out the Tyrer-Cuzick score. The exciting news here is that just about a month ago, a similar tool developed by Connie Lehman, who was involved in the initial MGH-MIT collaboration, has just received de novo authorization by the FDA. So it's the first AI tool using these mammography images to predict 5-year cancer risk. I think it's going to be a product later this year or in the coming months. So be on the lookout for that. Take-home points here are really that these AI-based mammography models do seem to slightly outperform traditional statistical tools. The big advantage here also is they don't require knowledge of clinical history. Not every patient comes in knowing their family history. There's recent FDA approval, although the caveat here is that it is only for use right now on 2D mammograms, not tomosynthesis. And it's also just, again, really important to monitor performance at your own center if you're using it. Also being cognizant that these types of tools may work best on the types of hardware or software that were similar to what was used in the training data, something that we should always keep in mind when using these kinds of tools. Okay, so now I want to shift gears here to efficiency-driven AI. So here's 2 types of examples. So you can kind of think of repetitive, quote-unquote, boring tasks that we do as radiologists. So for instance, every mammogram I read, I have to give a breast density categorization. Getting a tool that's doing this in an automated way would be a time saver. And then there's more novel applications like for adaptive MR scanning, which is one I want to focus on here. Okay, so MR scans are long. They include multiple standard sequences, and the protocols are static, so they're determined by the radiologist before the patient even walks into the imaging facility. And as I know from my graduate work in MRI, we always want to try and make MRI scans shorter. It could free up magnet time, it reduces costs, and in our case of breast cancer screening, it could really improve accessibility if we improve throughput of our patients. So when we think about breast cancer screening with MRI, so we're talking about, so I had mentioned that basically every woman starting at age 40 should be getting a mammogram every year. Patients who are at have a lifetime risk greater than 20 or 25% should also get an annual contrast-enhanced screening MRI. And a full MRI protocol is about 20 minutes, including a localizer, what I would call non-DCE sequences, so T1, non-contrast T1, T2, we do DWI, and then the DCE component. So the pre-contrast, we inject contrast, and then do post-contrast phases. And that's really where we're detecting the cancers. Small cancers outgrow their blood supply, there's leaky vessels, and that's what we're able to visualize on contrast-enhanced images. There's also abbreviated protocols, so abbreviated MRI actually can mean a range of things, commonly defined as just protocols that are less than 10 minutes long, but at their most bare bones, it could just be this localizer, and then you do the pre-contrast, inject, and do post-contrast. When we try and, I guess I would encourage you to rethink the MRI exam components. So we have these DCE sequences, which are ranging from 1.5 minutes if you're just doing the early phase to 5 or 6 minutes. And then you have the non-DCE part, which can really add up if you're doing a 5-minute diffusion, 5-minute T2, and then a minute or 2 for the T1. But when you think about it, the contrast-enhanced sequences are really the ones where we're identifying the small enhancing masses. That's where we get the sensitivity of the exam from. And really, these non-contrast sequences are really more for problem solving. So in about 5% of cases, by looking at the T1 or T2, we can help avoid biopsy. So on the left here, there's an enhancing mass, but it's very bright on T2. And that can be reassuring to us that maybe the patient doesn't need a biopsy. Similarly, on the right, we see a rim enhancing mass that looks kind of suspicious, but then you look at the T1 without fat saturation, there's a fat signal within the lesion. Well, then that's fat necrosis and it doesn't need a biopsy. So basically, when we think about the breast MRI exam, we're using the DCE sequences to find the cancer. And then in certain cases, subset of cases, these extra sequences can be helpful to avoid biopsy. So our idea here is, instead of using conventional scanning where all patients get the full MRI protocol, what if we had the patient get the pre-contrast, the post-contrast, had an AI tool look for any sign of anything enhancing that may be suspicious. And if there's anything that may be suspicious, you continue with the full protocol. But if it looks completely negative, it's lower suspicion, then you do early stopping and basically an abbreviated MRI protocol. So we recently published on this. I want to take you through our work here. So we had a patient population, about 1,400 consecutive screening breast MRIs in over 800 women. They were acquired at 3 of our imaging facilities between 2013 and 2019. And importantly, they weren't used during the training of an MR triage tool that we had previously published on below, which we had used. And there's many publications out there for using AI for triage for mammography, trying to identify completely normal mammograms. And here we're trying to identify completely normal MRIs. But the novelty here is using it not to remove cases from the work list, but to change the MRI scanning plan. And so for the paper here, we generated AI suspicion scores for all of the exams, and that's just using the pre and post contrast to generate some MIP images. And then we did a reader study. We ran the AI tool through all the exams, and the 50% of exams that were lower suspicion, so below the median suspicion score, went to the reader study. Each exam was looked at by 3 readers, and each reader gave 2 BI-RADS assessments. So first, they just used the DCE sequences, basically giving it an abbreviated MR interpretation, and then were unblinded to everything and gave another BI-RADS with the full protocol. And so then we were able to do the simulation of what we're calling adaptive scanning, where if the AI suspicion score, we basically set a certain threshold, and the threshold, the most progressive one that we set was 50%. So let's say we want to triage 50% of patients to this abbreviated protocol. So if it was below the 50% threshold, then we used the BI-RADS score from the reader study when they gave the ABMR score. If it was above the threshold we set, but below the median value, then we took the reader study BI-RADS from when the radiologist looked at the full protocol. And then if it was above the median value, we didn't have the radiologist look at all of those, because those were going to go for the full MR protocol, and we just used the radiology report. And then we did diagnostic performance statistics comparisons between the full protocol and this adaptive protocol, where we use AI to triage patients to full or abbreviated. And so here are our results. In red on the left, I'm showing the full protocol sensitivity and specificity. And then we did 25% triage in the middle, and then 50% triage on the right, again, directed by this AI tool. And what we saw actually that the sensitivity trended upwards. So it went from 86.3 to 88.2. It's small numbers. It's not really significant. But it was important to show that any cancer detected on the full protocol was also seen on the adaptive one, because again, it's the DCE sequences that are important. And the specificity, we were able to say basically that it's not going to decrease by more than 2.9%. Really, it didn't decrease by that. But what we did was we took the full protocol specificity and compared it to the lower end of the confidence interval of the adaptive protocol as a way to look at the maximum possible difference between them. So this is, we're excited by these results, and we're eager to do a larger prospective study to pave the way for clinical translation of adaptive scanning. So it really enables personalization of the MR exam. We showed that 50% triage maintains similar diagnostic performance to the full protocol. We're able to shorten overall scan time, again with the simulation, by 33%. This would decrease medical costs, improve patient satisfaction, and also probably improve image quality by shortening the exam. There will be less patient motion. It's really important when thinking about these sorts of things to mitigate harms, thinking about what happens when the tool fails. So if we go through a few examples here, what if there's a suspicious mass, but the AI score is inappropriately low? Well, the patient gets triaged to the abbreviated protocol, but the radiologist is still going to detect the suspicious mass on the DCE component, so we're okay. What about if there's an indeterminate or benign type mass? The AI score should be high because there is something enhancing there, but let's say it gives a low score, the patient's triaged to the abbreviated MR early stopping. Well, then you have a little bit of a problem, because the radiologist then looks at the image, has an enhancing mass, but wishes they had the T1 or T2, but it wasn't acquired. There's a little bit of a safety net here, though, because the patient can come and undergo those T1 and T2 sequences prior to biopsy if needed, and the biopsy could be canceled. So I don't think there's a high risk of harm. And then if there's a negative exam, the AI tool messes up and says that it's suspicious. then the patient gets triaged to the full protocol. There's not really harm there either, except they had to spend a few extra minutes in the scanner, which is what we're doing now on all patients anyway. So take-home points here is that AI can be used to improve workflow. The thought here is that screening breast MRI can be personalized as data is acquired during the exam. We're excited to embark on a larger trial to pave the way for clinical use, and it really has the potential to be extended not just to breast MR, but to many other MRI exams types where you can based on initial sequences, kind of figure out what other sequences you may or may not need. It also has the potential in a more granular way to personalize even case-based acquisitions. So as you're actually acquiring the data, maybe changing the trajectory based on information that you're getting along the way. So we're excited about that front as well. Just close with a brief slide here on how AI tools should be used. I think it's one of the things that us as radiologists should always be thinking about, trying to optimize the radiologist computer interface, whether or not we're using tools in a standalone way or in a as an aid. It's important to try and think through these things, because I think right now mostly they are being used as an aid. Over time, especially as sort of like a first pass mammography screening, you could see things get going in a more standalone direction in the short to mid-range future. But even in those situations, I think the take-home point is that we must always keep humans in the loop. So AI should always be subject to human judgment and control, whether that means on an individual exam basis where the radiologist is laying eyes on every exam. That's one model. It could be on a batch level, making sure that the AI is behaving as expected on a group level or population-based level. I think things will evolve as they go. So to conclude, in terms of future directions, AI is really in the process, I hope I've convinced you, of transforming the field of radiology in exciting ways. There are many promising clinical applications, really on the verge of widespread clinical use. We talked about breast cancer detection, breast cancer risk assessment, and then adaptive MR scanning. And then I just close by saying that I think we all just need to be proactive about ethical AI, making sure these systems are under human judgment and control, and allowing for ethical oversight and accountability. So here are my references. Thanks for your attention. Really happy to answer any questions or have a discussion.
Great, really great talk. Does anybody have any questions? You can put them in the chat, and we can share them, or you can raise your hand or even just jump in. So Sarah, can I start with a question? Because certainly all very, very interesting. I was completely fascinated by the adaptive AI, as you may imagine, from somebody who's responsible for operations of an entity. So what time slot are you scheduling these exams in right now when you do that?
Right. So right now, all of our clinical MRI scans are at max 30-minute slots. I think that, or now we're down to 20 minutes. I think our breast MR is probably about 15 minutes. But again, with a really bare bones abbreviated MR, you're talking about less than 5 minutes.
Yeah. We've been able to get down to 15-minute slots in an event to try to make it more affordable for patients. But I love the idea of adaptive MRI, but then that adds unpredictability to the total length of the total length of the exam.
Right. I guess it depends on your volume, though.
Right.
Because
Yes, that's
over
true.
time, things can average. You have multiple scanners going. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, with this AI tool also, we're thinking about one of the things I'm interested in is using it for workflow in our breast center. If you have we batch read the screening exams, but if you have this AI score where there's very high likelihood that at least a subset of these are going to need same-day biopsies, that maybe you can create kind of a pathway for express scanning and diagnostic workout.
We do have a question in the chat. Let me read it. It's so great to see you applying your skills to improve the value we delivered. Do you see a use for AI in QC for mammograms and/or tomosynthesis? As you mentioned with breast MRI, inline AI could optimize the protocol as it goes. It could flag patients for additional views in mammography.
Yeah. So that's something we've thought about too, and it's kind of similar to what we were just discussing. And especially, actually, we do some contrast enhanced mammography here too, which the timing is really important, because now we're reading them actually batches many times as screening. But you'd have a patient who show up, get the injection, it'd be the standard 4 views of screening. Then by the time the tech brings it to me, I look at the case, it's a busy day, and it's been 10 or 15 minutes, and then I want an extra view, and the contrast is all washed out. And so I think that it could be kind of used, as I said before, sort of at every step along the way. In terms, I think there are there are vendors now that are offering kind of QA for like positioning of mammograms, like to help the techs, like things get flagged. I'm not sure if we're using it here in our clinic, but at RSNA, there's a lot of people pitching those kind of things. So there's lots of room for optimization here.
Yeah, we have a comment that says that raises the point that if AI alone is not inferior to a single radiologist, people may want to replace the radiologist with AI and maybe an APP or some other practitioner.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the areas that we're talking about it being non-inferior are really streamlined screening binary assessments right now. So yes, in 10 or 15 years, if like the legal regulatory catches up and there are really robust AI tools to do that additional triage, yeah, it's going to shake up the market a little bit, but maybe that makes a lot of sense, because you are going to have kind of a redistribution of the workforce. You actually have a need of a lot more like data science background people to be embedded in our radiology facility, because as we start bringing on just one AI tool or two AI tools, we're just completely incapable of optimizing the monitoring part. And so, yeah, I think medicine's going to be adapting over time, and pairing AI with a healthcare personnel who may have less encyclopedic knowledge, but more of like the know-how PA style could make sense in the future.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right. There is a question about who's going to absorb the legal liability when AI is wrong. I think we're gonna have. I mean, Sarah, if you want to answer that,
Please, you're welcome to. But yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the challenges here.
Mhm.
I think that we all make mistakes, though, and I guess we've set up a legal infrastructure so the person making the mistake is personally responsible. Although I feel like the kind of evolution of what's it called? Just like the different cycles of when you have medical errors and trying
Yeah.
to find like it's a Swiss cheese model, right? So like we're moving away from personal responsibility, I think, in errors in medicine in general, just because there's so many people involved. And the radiologist is like the last person standing where you can point and say, like, that was there last year. And so then it's more obvious that it was missed. But I think that if you have rigorously validated tools in a certain context and you use that tool and sometimes it fails, it's not that different from using other medical equipment that can sometimes fail. And what do we do about that? So I think that the field will have to evolve, and it may be a slow or more conservative. It'll take longer to kind of sort that stuff out. But if you're using AI in a responsible way based on data showing that it's going to work above what the average radiologist would do in a context, then maybe that's not malpractice. Maybe that's just an unavoidable error of the system. So.
And all, I do think, even based on what you presented today, I think that I think our tools are going to improve, right? When you show the numbers, mammography is great because we use it across large populations,
Yeah.
but it's not the best tool. It's not the best tool in the world when you have so many patients that have to come back to detect,
Yeah.
5 or 6 cancers per 1,000. So and one of the things which I think AI, I like the data that you showed from Adam Yala with,
Yeah.
in terms of risk prediction, because I do think that potentially some of the real value of this AI is to do things that we as humans can't do, or to see things that we as humans can't perceive in the images, right? Like we can't look at an image and say that there's what your 5-year cancer
Yeah.
risk is.
Although I joke with some of the senior radiologists who have years and years of experience, and I say, I feel like if you went head to head with this MIT tool, I think you might be better. Because like there's also gestalt of like you look at the mammogram,
Yeah.
what are you seeing? Not that should be how we're deciding how we're triaging patients to MR right now. But going back to the other point, meaning right now it's a little bit neck to neck, meaning maybe we're showing that these AI tools are non-inferior to humans, and so then we can quip about, oh, should the radiologist replace the human? Should it not? If the next generation of tools are way above and beyond what me or another fellowship trained breast imager can do in terms of sensitivity and specificity, then it's kind of a no-brainer that patients are going to want that tool, even if it sometimes messes
Yep.
up, if it's just clearly superior to what we can offer as humans.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of the future, and maybe we have to prepare the
And,
infrastructure for that.
and if you can really get an MR down to 5 minutes, right? Or, in a 10-minute slot, you change the entire economics of doing that test, which we do know is a better test than
Yeah,
mammography, at least
right,
in many patients.
right, exactly. Yeah,
But
so
it,
we're really excited about that. We should talk. We're
yeah,
looking for other centers. And yeah, I think it's not just in breast imaging, as I was saying, but like multiple sclerosis, let's say, deciding who needs contrast. You
yeah,
can think of other situations where it would be helpful to triage.
yeah. We should talk because we have some things going on too. Um, any other questions? Well, if not, thank you again, Sarah. This was, really, really an interesting talk. We, on behalf of the foundation, we certainly appreciate you helping us out and helping us generate the funds for training our next generation of radiologists and radiology leaders. So thanks again, and we'll touch base soon.
All right, thank you so much.
Have a good night, everybody.